Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Leaders in the Democratic-controlled House and Senate have agreed to rewrite nation surveillance laws and to give what amounts to legal immunity to phone companies that took part in the Bush administration's secret domestic surveillance program. The bill has been described as the most significant revision of surveillance law in 3 decades. The legislation gives the government new powers to eavesdrop on both domestic and international communications. One provision would allow the government to wiretap Americans for up to a week without court order. The House is expected to approve the measure today. The Senate will vote next week. Several prominent Democratic senators criticized the bill. Senator Russ Feingold said, quote, "The proposed FISA deal is not a compromise, it's a capitulation." Meanwhile, the House has passed a $162 billion war spending bill to keep funding the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The bill was approved by a vote of 268 to 155. As the House approved the war spending bill, a protester in the visitors' gallery began throwing red-stained dollars at lawmakers. Minority Leader Republican John Boehner said he was pleased with the vote.
A compromise is a compromise. And I want to thank my Democrat colleagues for working with us to get to this point. And I want to thank them for their commitment that this is the bill. This is the bill that will end up on the president's desk.
Many Democrats criticized the bill for not setting any conditions on President Bush. This is House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
So let us think and hope that this is the last time that there will ever be another dollar spent without constraints, without conditions, without direction. Why should we trust the same judgment that got us here in the first place in this war?
The House also voted to approve spending $63 billion to expand college-age aid for veterans of the 2 wars. The New York Times is reporting Israel recently carried out a major military exercise that U.S. officials say appeared to be a rehearsal for a potential bombing attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. More than 100 Israeli F-16 and F-15 fighter planes took part in the maneuvers over the eastern Mediterranean and Greece. Helicopters and refueling tankers flew more than 900 miles, which is about the same distance between Israel and Iran's uranium enrichment plant at Natanz. One Pentagon official said the Israeli test was meant to send a clear message that Israel's prepared to act militarily if diplomatic efforts to stop Iran from producing bomb-grade uranium faltered. Meanwhile, Iran said Thursday it's ready to negotiate over a new package of economic incentives put forward by the major powers seeking to persuade Tehran to curb nuclear work. But Iranian Foreign Minister Manouchehr Mottaki said the United States should stop lecturing Iran on its nuclear ambitions.
America is not in the position to be happy or unhappy with our nuclear activities to produce energy for peaceful purposes, because America is the first country which used nuclear weapons and killed more than 150,000 of the people in Japan.
A new report by the U.S. Climate Change Science Program is predicting North America will experience more extreme weather as greenhouse gas emissions rise. Some regions will experience more droughts and excessive heat, while others will be hit with more intense hurricanes and downpours. The report warned extreme weather events are, quote, among the most serious challenges to society in coping with a changing climate. The report was released while the Midwest continues to face widespread flooding. Officials say 18 more levees on the Mississippi River are at high risk of being overwhelmed this weekend. 31 levees have already been breached or topped. USA Today reports many of these levees were not built to handle a flood of such historic proportions. In campaign news, Democratic presidential candidate Barack Obama has announced he's opting out of the federal public financing system in the general election. By turning down $84 million in federal money, Obama will be allowed to raise and spend an unlimited amount during the election. Obama is the first major party candidate to reject public funds since the system started in 1976. The decision marks a reversal for Obama. Last year, he'd pledged to accept public financing if his opponent did as well. McCain confirmed he'll stay in the public financing system. McCain's spokesperson, Jill Hazelbaker, said, quote, Obama's decision will have far-reaching and extraordinary consequences that will weaken and undermine the public financing system. ABC News is reporting former Attorney General Alberto Gonzales ousted a top Justice Department attorney in 2005 for failing to adopt the administration's position on torture, and then promised him a position as a U.S. attorney to placate him. Attorney Daniel Levin was asked to leave the department after he wrote a legal opinion that declared tortures abhorrent and limited the administration's use of harsh interrogation techniques. The UN Security Council has unanimously approved a resolution denouncing rape and other sexual violence as a tactic of war. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice urged the UN to pass the measure.
As many of you know, for years, there's been a debate about whether or not sexual violence against women is a security issue for this forum to address. I am proud that today we respond to that lingering question with a resounding yes. This world body now acknowledges that sexual violence in conflict zones is indeed a security concern. We affirm that sexual...
Human rights activists say rape is no longer simply a byproduct of war and has become a deliberate tactic designed to demoralize and intimidate communities. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon urged a zero-tolerance policy toward all forms of sexual violence.
Violence against women has reached unspeakable and pandemic proportions in some societies attempting to recover from conflict. Responding to this silent war against women and girls requires leadership at the national level. National authorities need to take the initiative to build comprehensive strategies, while the UN needs to help build capacity and support national authorities and civil societies.
In business news, the FBI has arrested and charged 2 former hedge fund managers at the investment bank Bear Stearns for fraud over 2 funds that collapsed last year. Matthew Tannen and Ralph Siafi are the first executives to face criminal charges in the wake of the subprime mortgage crisis. The FBI also announced it's charged more than 400 people since March in a nationwide crackdown on mortgage fraud. Deputy Attorney General Mark Phillip announced the charges.
And the allegations detailed in that indictment are that the losses to investors are roughly $1.4 billion. Now, at the risk of overstating the obvious, lawyers will disagree, their experts will disagree as to what exact dollar amount is appropriate to ascribe to those losses as to fraud. But that's what that indictment charges. The other cases are believed to encompass an additional $1 billion. So you're talking about billions of dollars.
The European Union has agreed to scrap its sanctions against Cuba. The EU's External Relations Commissioner, Benita Ferraro-Waldner, announced the news at a meeting in Brussels.
Yes, the Cuba sanctions will be lifted, but at the same time there will be very clear language also on what the Cubans still have to do. I mean, of course, releasing prisoners, really to work on human rights questions. So indeed, and there will be a sort of review to see whether indeed something will have happened. But I think it's very important because we also want to encourage the changes in Cuba.
In San Francisco, over 1,000 protesters rallied outside a health insurance industry convention Thursday to demand the creation of a single-payer health care system. The demonstration targeted America's health insurance plans, an industry group. Other protests called for single-payer were held across the country. Independent presidential candidate Ralph Nader addressed a rally in New York.
How many die? The Institute of Medicine of the National Academy of Sciences estimates that 18,000 Americans die every year because they can't afford health insurance. Now, nobody dies in Canada, Belgium, France, Germany, England because they can't afford health insurance, because they all have health insurance.
A judge in Washington state has sentenced a 32-year-old violin teacher and environmental activist to 6 years in prison for her role in an arson at the University of Washington Center for Urban Horticulture. Brianna Waters was also ordered to pay $6 million in restitution. Federal prosecutors accused her of being a terrorist and had sought a 10-year sentence. Here in New York, residents of Harlem are staging a protest Saturday to protest plans to rezone the 125th Street area. Critics say the rezoning will permanently change the character of Harlem and pave the way for greater gentrification. Nellie Bailey of the Harlem Tenants Council is the lead organizer of Saturday's march.
All of this is tied in. This isn't just random. This is tied into the way the city and the Bloomberg administration is determined to redefine these neighborhoods. And these neighborhoods where the message, I believe, is very, very clear. Low income and poor people cannot live on expensive real estate here in New York City.
Those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.